Steelers Nation, the Pittsburgh Steelers are constantly looking for ways to improve this football team, and that mission has never been more important than it is right now. Every preseason game is another opportunity to identify weaknesses, develop young players, and make the difficult decisions that can ultimately determine whether Pittsburgh is ready to compete when the games start counting. And after Friday night's 17-0 loss to the New York Jets, there are some very serious questions that need to be answered. One of the biggest is surrounding Will Howard. The Steelers gave Howard perhaps the most important audition of his young NFL career, and while there were some encouraging moments, 2 interceptions completely changed the story. Before we break everything down, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to Black and Gold Gridiron Updates, and turn on notifications. Steelers Nation, if you want the official Steelers store, the link is in the description and the comment. Tons of new Sideline gear and hoodies available. Because Steelers Nation, there is a lot to talk about. Friday night was supposed to be a showcase for Will Howard. With Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph sitting out, Mike McCarthy handed the young quarterbacks the keys to the offense. Howard got the first half almost entirely to himself. This was the opportunity he needed. And for stretches, Howard looked comfortable. He completed 10 of 15 passes for 74 yards and showed that he could operate McCarthy's offense without looking overwhelmed. Pittsburgh was able to move the football, and there were moments when
But there was one problem. The Steelers couldn't finish. And the biggest reason was Howard's inability to protect the football. 2 interceptions turned what could have been an encouraging performance into a night Pittsburgh would rather forget. The first interception was especially damaging. The Steelers had driven into the red zone and were in position to potentially put points on the board. But Andre Sisco undercut Howard's throw, intercepted the football, and immediately ended Pittsburgh's scoring opportunity. The second interception came on the following possession. Howard attempted to push the ball deep toward Roman Wilson, but the throw was underthrown, allowing Samuel Womack to make the play. 2 promising drives, 2 turnovers, 0 points. And that's the harsh reality of playing quarterback in the NFL. You can make several good throws. You can move the offense. You can look comfortable. But if you turn the ball over when your team is about to score, everything else becomes secondary. There was, however, something encouraging about Howard's response. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame his receivers. He didn't blame protection. He didn't point toward the fact that this was his first extended preseason opportunity. He accepted responsibility. Howard admitted that his performance wasn't good enough and specifically talked about the importance of protecting the football. He understood exactly what went wrong. And that matters, because development isn't about never making mistakes.
Howard said he felt that the offense was moving the ball well, and that both interceptions came during drives that had real potential. That's a fair assessment. But he also understood the most important lesson. The quarterback has to protect the football. That's something Mike McCarthy has emphasized repeatedly. And McCarthy made it clear that Howard allowed 1 mistake to become 2. That's probably the biggest takeaway from Friday night. The NFL is full of plays that don't develop exactly as expected. A receiver can be covered, a defensive back can undercut a route, a pass rush lane can suddenly disappear. The great quarterbacks aren't judged by whether those things happen. They're judged by how they respond when they do. Howard now has to demonstrate that he can recognize when a play has broken down and simply live to fight another down. And this performance could make the quarterback competition even more complicated. Mason Rudolph remains the safer option. Mike McCarthy has repeatedly praised him throughout the offseason, and after the first preseason game, the coach said he had already seen what he needed to see from the veteran. That explains why Rudolph didn't play against the Jets. Pittsburgh already knows what Rudolph can provide. Howard is the unknown. Drew Aller is the developmental quarterback with enormous long-term potential, and Aaron Rodgers is the veteran starter expected to lead this team in 2026. The Steelers have a fascinating quarterback room, but Howard's problem is simple. He has to prove that his upside is worth trusting. One bad preseason game won't destroy his chances.
But another performance featuring costly turnovers could make it extremely difficult for Pittsburgh to justify moving Rudolph aside. And that's where the pressure really begins. Howard isn't simply competing against another quarterback. He's competing against experience. But the quarterback situation isn't the only concern coming out of Friday night's loss. The offensive line has suddenly become one of the biggest problems on this roster, and more specifically, right tackle. The left side has actually provided plenty of encouragement. Troy Fautanu looked much more comfortable. Mason McCormick continues to make progress at left guard, and Zach Frazier remains one of the most reliable young players on the entire offense. But the right side? That's a completely different story. Dylan Cook has struggled badly through the first 2 preseason games. Spencer Anderson has been inconsistent, and Mike McCarthy clearly isn't satisfied with what he's seeing. The coaching staff even rotated Brock Hoffman and Broderick Jones into the mix during the first half. That tells you everything. There is still no clear answer, and with the regular season getting closer, that's becoming a major concern. Now, Steelers fans may be looking at a player who hasn't even played an NFL game yet, Max Ihianacher. The 2026 first-round pick was expected to have an opportunity to compete for the starting right tackle job before an early training camp injury disrupted his progress. But now, Pittsburgh may have no choice. If Cook and Anderson can't establish themselves, Ihianacher could become the team's best in-house option. That's an enormous responsibility for a 21-year-old rookie.
Especially when you consider what Pittsburgh is trying to accomplish. Aaron Rodgers is 42 years old. The Steelers are not building this team simply to gain experience. They want to compete. They want to make a legitimate postseason run. And if the offensive line cannot protect Rodgers, none of that matters. The right tackle position could become one of the most important stories of the entire 2026 season. This is where things could get very interesting. If there's one thing we've learned about Steelers general manager Omar Khan, it's that the trade market can never be completely ruled out. Pittsburgh has been aggressive in recent years, and with the organization clearly trying to compete now, Khan could potentially explore another move. The problem? Finding a quality offensive tackle this late in the preseason isn't easy. Teams are still evaluating their own rosters. Nobody wants to give away a reliable starter unless the return is significant. And once the regular season approaches, the price could become even higher. Pittsburgh could potentially wait until final roster cuts. A veteran tackle who unexpectedly becomes available could be exactly what the Steelers need. But that's also a gamble. If the trade market doesn't cooperate, Pittsburgh could turn toward free agency. There are still veterans with starting experience available. Jonah Williams is one intriguing possibility. The former first-round pick has extensive starting experience, although injuries have become a concern during his recent seasons. Jack Conklin is another veteran name who could potentially make sense.
Conklin has 114 career starts and could provide something Pittsburgh desperately needs: experience. He could also serve as a mentor for Ihianacher and the younger offensive linemen. But once again, health is the major question, and that's the last thing Pittsburgh needs. The Steelers don't want to solve one problem by creating another. The Steelers have one more preseason game to find answers. For Will Howard, it's about proving that the Jets game was a learning experience rather than the beginning of a worrying trend. For Mike McCarthy, it's about determining whether Howard can eventually be trusted behind Rodgers. For Omar Khan, it's about determining whether the right tackle situation is good enough to enter the regular season. And for Steelers Nation, it's about watching the pieces of this roster finally come together. The loss to the Jets doesn't mean the season is doomed. Far from it. Preseason results don't determine what happens in September, but preseason performances can expose problems. And Pittsburgh has now exposed two very clear ones: quarterback development and right tackle stability. Those are areas the Steelers cannot afford to ignore. Roman Wilson's NFL career hasn't gone the way Steelers fans expected. The organization selected him in the third round of the 2024 NFL Draft with the hope that he could eventually become an important contributor in the passing game. But injury...
Against the Jets, Wilson caught just 2 passes for 16 yards, despite being targeted 5 times. Those numbers alone aren't necessarily devastating for a preseason game, but the bigger concern is what happened on those targets. Wilson was involved in one of the most damaging moments of the night when Will Howard threw an interception on a deep pass intended for him. The throw was underthrown, and Samuel Womack came away with the football. But the play also raised questions about Wilson's route execution. And that's where this story becomes much bigger than a simple box score. According to analysis from The Athletic's Mike DeFabo, Wilson's biggest issue may be trust. And when you're playing with Aaron Rodgers, trust is everything. Rodgers has spent his career demanding precision from his receivers. He expects them to understand exactly where they need to be. He expects them to recognize defensive adjustments. And perhaps most importantly, he expects them to execute the details of their routes. If a receiver consistently makes small mistakes, Rodgers isn't going to keep throwing him the football. That's the reality Wilson is facing. DeFabo pointed out that Steelers fans have been waiting for Wilson's impressive training camp performances to translate into actual game production. That hasn't happened consistently, and that's becoming a problem. This is perhaps the most frustrating part of Wilson's situation. Reports from Steelers training camp.
And that's a dangerous reputation for any young player. You can dominate practice. You can make spectacular catches during training camp. You can look like one of the best receivers on the roster during 7-on-7 drills. But eventually, you have to do it in games. And Wilson is running out of opportunities to prove that he can. The Steelers have only one preseason game remaining. That's August 27 against the Buffalo Bills. And that game could be extremely important for Wilson. There's another name Steelers fans need to watch: Jeremy Bernard. The rookie has entered the conversation, and that's exactly what Wilson didn't need. Bernard represents something Pittsburgh desperately wants from its young receivers: reliability and upside. If Bernard continues showing coaches that he can execute the offense, make plays, and earn Aaron Rodgers' confidence, suddenly Wilson's position becomes much more difficult. Think about the potential depth chart. DK Metcalf is expected to be one of the team's primary weapons. Michael Pittman Jr. is another major piece when healthy. Then you have the competition behind them. If Rodgers begins trusting Bernard more,
The Steelers have Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers is 42 years old. The organization isn't bringing him to Pittsburgh to develop young receivers for several years. They are trying to win now. That means Rodgers needs receivers he can trust immediately. He needs players who understand the offense. He needs receivers who know how to adjust their routes. He needs players who are exactly where they're supposed to be when he releases the football. There simply isn't much room for repeated mistakes. Wilson has to prove that he can be one of those players. This is why the final preseason game against Buffalo suddenly feels much more important for Wilson. He doesn't necessarily need to catch 10 passes. He doesn't need to score 3 touchdowns. But he needs to show something: precision, consistency, separation, strong route execution, good. If Metcalf or Pittman misses time, Pittsburgh needs players behind them who can step onto the field without the offense collapsing. That's where Wilson should be valuable. He has experience, he understands the system, he has spent time with Rodgers, and the Steelers clearly still believe there is something worth developing. But potential doesn't guarantee playing time. If Bernard or another young receiver proves more dependable, Pittsburgh has to reward the player who earns it. That's professional football. Absolutely. And that's what makes this situation so fascinating. Roman Wilson is not out of the picture, not even close. One strong game can change the narrative. One explosive touchdown, one perfectly executed route, one contested catch, one sequence where Rodgers trusts him on a critical third down. Those moments could completely change how the coaching staff views him. But Wilson needs them now. Not in September, not in October, now. The preseason is almost over. The roster is taking shape. The regular season is coming. And every practice rep and every preseason snap carries more weight. Now, I want to hear from you. Should Pittsburgh continue developing Will Howard as the potential future backup? Or did his performance against the Jets make you more comfortable with Mason Rudolph? And what about right tackle? Do you trust Max Iannacor to eventually take over?
Should Omar Khan explore the trade market? Or should Pittsburgh look at a veteran free agent such as Jonah Williams or Jack Conklin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because these aren't just preseason debates.
These decisions could shape the Steelers' 2026 season and potentially their future beyond it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe to Black and Gold Gridiron Updates, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next Steelers update. Official Pittsburgh Steelers gear, new drops, and exclusive items all in the link below. Check it out, Steelers Nation! The preseason is almost over. The roster decisions are coming, and the Steelers are running out of time to solve their biggest problems. Stay locked in, Steelers Nation. The road to the 2026 season is getting very real.